Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live session around Microsoft Online Services Optimization. Today, we want to take you through how we look at optimizing your Microsoft Cloud environment, and we want to look at the different cloud areas that Microsoft has. So, again, if you haven't already and you found us through some other means, please, we would love for you to follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So, you can watch this on both platforms. We will share all our updates via our LinkedIn channel, and all our content is available on demand through our YouTube channel. So do follow both and put on notifications so that you know when we have put up something new. Now, with that out of the way, let's go into it. So what will we be covering today? This presentation will give you insight in how you can discover optimizations in your Microsoft Cloud environment and how to go about implementing this. We will cover the different areas, like I said, Azure, Dynamics 365, and Microsoft 365, and we will do it in that order. Why does Microsoft not do this? Is a question that we've often been asked by our clients. Microsoft is actively working on giving you the correct tools to look for cost savings, but Microsoft sales teams will often not tell you about these because that might hurt their target, the way they want to operate with you as their client. So the Microsoft sales teams often just want you to go about business as usual and want to only upsell you new services. They don't really want to play this down. There's some industries where they know it's very difficult, like in the Netherlands, might be healthcare, for instance, where they see that selling everybody E5, for instance, for Microsoft 365 E5 is not the way to go. So they offer profiles for different types of users within your hospital, for instance, or for your healthcare organization. But generally, what they are doing is looking at their target, seeing how they can best fill that target, and then reason towards that goal. So there are Microsoft cost saving tools. They're quite limited, so they don't tell you everything. And that's why we felt it necessary to record this session. So we have unique insights into the Microsoft organization. We always say that as we've been at Microsoft, former Microsoft negotiators, you can benefit from our expertise. So the black box that is called Microsoft, it changes quickly, but on top of that, you see that a lot of sales teams can act erratic. Licensing models might get switched around, and the sales teams might want to profit from that. We always try to make sense of this. And as we have lived through most of these things ourselves, we have been in the situation where we are selling things to Microsoft customers that they might not have needed per se. And a lot is possible. More than you know, Microsoft is not going to tell you themselves. So this presentation should serve as a reminder of how to go about doing this and how to best operate this. So first, alphabetically, we want to start with Azure and how you can best look at cloud cost management, or how you can optimize your Azure environment. And we've highlighted a couple of categories. So there are some different categories there where we identify cost savings: programmatic licensing optimizations, technical optimizations, and financial optimizations. In the coming slides, we will go through this one by one. So if you look at programmatic cost reduction possibilities, you would quickly arrive at Azure Hybrid Benefit and reserved instances. And we have some on-demand content on our YouTube page if you want to learn more about how to calculate if Azure Hybrid Benefit is right for your organization or not. But Azure Hybrid Benefit is basically a programmatic option where you can reduce cost in your Azure environment when you have Windows Server and SQL Server with software assurance licensed in, for instance, a Microsoft Volume licensing contract. It allows you to not pay for the Windows Server and or SQL Server cost of your Azure VM or database by leveraging these software assurance entitlements. Microsoft has created this just for Azure, so it's not allowed on AWS or Alibaba or Google Cloud or others. And they've done so because they don't really want to cannibalize on the past investments that you have done. And they don't want you to cannibalize on those investments by reducing this from your contract and moving towards Azure consumption. So it's easy to set up. You can do it now already. If you have Azure VMs that don't leverage Azure Hybrid Benefit, you can easily spin them up again or earmark them as bring your own license, and you are good to go. An additional benefit here is that there is no need for extended security updates. So if you're running a very old version of Windows Server or a very old database that might go out of support, or extended support, and you still need to have security updates for this, moving that to Azure can help you save cost if you still want to receive these security updates. So the claim is, and that's generally true if you look at it from a VM perspective, for instance, you can save up to 60% of on the price of your Windows Server VM by leveraging Azure Hybrid Benefit. Additionally, how to go about licensing this, do again check the content that we have on our YouTube page, but just to give a little bit of background, you will need to count the VMs that you have. You will need to know the amount of Windows Server or SQL Server and software assurance license that you have. And there's some generic rules on what you can do with your software assurance entitlements. So every VM that you have should at least have 8 cores of software assurance assigned to it. So albeit a 1-core VM, a 2-core VM, a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8-core VM, you need to assign a minimum of 8 core Windows Server software assurance licenses to these VMs. And everything above 8 cores obviously need the right amount of software assurance licenses. So you should definitely count the amount of VMs you have, the amount of cores per VM, and if it makes sense. Additionally, if this is a VM that might not be running 24/7, or there's a cutoff point, it might not make sense to assign bring your own licenses as well, because for software assurance, usually you pay an annual price and not just a monthly consumption price as you do in Azure. So there's a lot of ifs and buts. So do check out, again, our video that we have around this. It will help you immensely. Then reserved instances, for if you don't know these, and Amazon does this as well. You can lock in certain VMs, VM types in a specific data center, like a D3 V4 VM in Western Europe, for instance. And when you buy a reserved instance for that type of machine in that data center, you can potentially reduce up to 72% on these VM prices. You can lock it in for 1 year or 3 year. 3 year is quite a long time. You will be able to take that with you wherever your contract goes, because it's not tied to a specific contract. But we don't generally advise 3 year, because you never know what might happen in the meantime. Microsoft might release a new version of that VM which is way cheaper, and you want to switch to that one. You then have to exchange your reserved instance to that new version as well, bringing with it all kinds of issues. So it might be easier to go for 1 year. Though the 3 year obviously gives a better price premium to the monthly consumption rate. So the cost of the RI will be effectuated in your monthly bill or immediately reduced in total from your prepayment if you have done a prepayment for Azure. Like I said, you can cancel or exchange your RIs. Cancel would mean that you terminate it, but a termination fee applies, and there's a cap towards what you can cancel on an annual basis. And exchange is where you just give back the reserved instances that you've done, and you can use the remaining value of that reserved instance to buy new reserved instances. So in the case you do decide to sign up for a 3-year reserved instance, and halfway through you might find that there's a cheaper VM, a new version of that VM, or you want to switch to a different VM type, you would hit the exchange button. Microsoft would say, okay, this is the value amount that was remaining for this RI. You can use that value amount to buy a new RI, and the additional cost for that new RI will be on your annual monthly bill, or again reduced from your prepayment. You can assign these at enrollment level or at subscription level. So if you don't generally care where this reserved instance lands, you can assign it at enrollment level, and Microsoft will do the trickle down for you to the subscriptions that this might apply to, or you can pinpoint a specific subscription and say, okay, for this subscription, I want all the VMs to be assigned an RI. This is very interesting for VMs that might run a longer period of time. So it's very interesting for Azure services that are online over 9 months a year. So not generally everything 24/7, but even somewhat less than that. Now, if we look at technical cost reduction possibilities, there's some easy things that you can envision, and these might be easy giveaways, but we generally see that these are issues that our customers still run into to this day, or not take care of at all. So when you look at your Azure consumption on monthly basis, what you can look for is the use of general purpose compute, like the D series compute, where you have tied premium disks to. Apparently, premium disks on a general purpose compute can't get the full value from this. So a standard disk would serve better, as it would provide the same performance. Now, if you are a company operating, for instance, solely in the Netherlands or in France or Spain, and you have no affiliates in other parts of the world, but you want to use the backup functionality available to you in Azure, and you set up GRS, so geo-redundant storage for your backup purposes, that might not make sense, because you're a very locally oriented company, so the local redundant storage would serve you just as well and might save you a lot of cost. You can look for resizing your VMs. So often the VMs you used are too heavy for the workload it's running. A D series is often spun up, but it might be that a different type of VM like B series would do the trick as well and would save you a lot of money. And finally, what we find a lot is issues around dev test VMs. So you set up your development environment, you're testing, you're running acceptance workloads with test data. Then you are allowed to use dev test pricing. Dev test pricing is basically the price you pay for just the base compute for your VMs. So you don't have to pay the Windows Server cost or the SQL Server cost. We even see companies that are using subscriptions for dev test purposes, but use the Azure Hybrid Benefit functionality to reduce the cost of those VMs. It's not necessary. You can, if you have the right amount of Visual Studio and MSDN licenses, reduce this to just the dev test pricing, and you will find these easily in the price list for Azure. Finally, on dev test, environments should not have to run 24/7. There's no development environment that is testing 24/7, and if there are, there might be a good reason for it, but you might identify that you need it for a max amount of 10 hours a day during the work week, and you can turn it off in the evenings and on the weekends. These are some easy, quick fix items that you can look into and benefit from. So then financial cost reduction possibilities. You might want to check your prices often, because it might be that your Azure services are cheaper in another region. One common example that we run into, obviously, being located in Europe, EU West fees versus EU North. The North is usually cheaper than EU West. So if you're using EU West, it might be interesting to identify what the cost difference is between EU North. Platform independence. So whenever you want to run a workload in Azure, you have a new project that needs to go towards the cloud. Do always do your due diligence. Please do it and check AWS, Google Cloud, even Alibaba. I don't know what other platforms are there, but it might be that there's a large cost differences between these platforms. Generally doesn't matter that much, but it might be that the solution that you're working towards is more optimally suited for AWS instead of Azure. So you shouldn't disqualify the one because you have a better idea around Azure than you have AWS. In our opinion, multi-cloud strategy should always be the way to go. Finally, your solution might be out of date. Microsoft releases many new versions. Take advantage of this as well. A V3 is often cheaper than a V2. A V5 is even released currently for D series, I believe. It might be cheaper than the one you're running right now. So do keep an eye out for these and change towards the latest version, because when Microsoft generally releases a new version, it's because they have found a way to bring this to you cheaper and better. So take advantage of this. Then some other best practices that we often discuss with our customers: make effective use of tagging. So you want to make sure that all your resources in Azure are tagged correctly and that you can easily find why this is running, where this is running, so that you can identify when you turn off, for instance, a VM, if there's still cost associated to that VM in other services like storage that you might no longer need that continue to run. There's often a lot of clutter in Azure environments where services continue to incur cost month over month without actually being used. So when you spun up a development environment and you take down the VM, but you forgot to delete the data for that environment, it will still incur cost. So always tag, and some best practices that you can find online for this is, and include environment. Is it development, test, production, whatever else tag you want to give it. What type of system is it? Is it critical, non-critical? The application name that the resource belongs to, the owner of this, and or its email address. If you have this set up already, what cost center is associated to this, and what business area. So these are some tags that must be included in order for you to be easily know if something is or isn't still needed. Then when you do effective tagging, also you are able to set and check for budget alerts. So you have to set your correct tags. Then you can check, okay, does this stay within the budget that we have allocated for it? And you can easily set these markers within the Azure environment. So we can say, okay, this application can only incur this amount of cost on a monthly basis because that's what we priced it out as. And it shouldn't go above this. So when it does go above it, you get this alert. And you can check to see what's going on, what's changed, why has this changed, and should we increase the budget for this, or do we take down some of the services? And then something that we don't often see is that you use the Azure hierarchy to your benefit. So if you sign up for Azure, you have the option to not only start at the enrollment or contractual level, but you can create departments, accounts, and then subscriptions. So make sure that you think of the hierarchy that makes sense for you. So what do you want to list as departments? Do you want to take business units? Do you want to take different areas within your organization? And then the accounts underneath. So if you have a business unit called finance, what do you want accounts do you want to give to that? Do you want to give that to different controllers within that doing things within that environment, or do you want to give it to sub departments that you might have within your organization, etc., etc. And finally, preferably create a link with Azure Cost Management and Power BI dashboards to get the correct level of results shown to you and all the people that might need this. So Dynamics 365 is next. How do you optimize for this? Well, at the moment, we don't generally have ways to find optimization potential from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, but mainly what you want to look for here is how do I and have I licensed my Dynamics 365 environment. So there's not a lot as far as we know on how to optimize, but we did put some points together. How to license Dynamics 365 applications, how to license Dynamics 365 storage, how to get from the old to the new model, though most people should have been transitioned by now or are transitioning at this moment, and then understand your options for contracting. So I want to quickly go through this. If we find further ways to optimize your Dynamics 365 environment, we will, of course, update this presentation as quickly as we can. But this is what we are looking for when we are doing our engagements with our clients. So this is the Dynamics 365 mapping. You see still the CRM items that you might know, like sales enterprise or sales professional, marketing, field service. There are some licenses for HoloLens, like guides and remote assist. And there's the ERP aspect with supply chain management, finance, human resource, commerce, project operations. And outside of that, Business Central, which, if you really want to, can be purchased in your enterprise agreement. If you want to know more about any of these items, on our YouTube page, you can find the on-demand Dynamics 365 deep dive training that we did. And we have, of course, cut this up in its relevant portions with where we discuss what your options are for each and any of these applications. Now, what's important to understand still, and what we see that is very difficult for a lot of our clients to comprehend, is that how can you license your applications? So you start by choosing a base license, and a base license can be any of the single apps that you just saw on the previous screen, except for the ones on the right hand side. But we'll show you how to navigate that in the next slide. And then for any additional application that you might need, you can use the attach motion. So if you have a base need for Dynamics 365 for sales, enterprise for all your users, but there's also some users that might benefit from field service or customer service, you can add those as attached licenses for these users, either 1, 2, 5, or all of your users. The base license generally is the most expensive one. It will allow you for the use of the Dynamics 365 environment, and the attached licenses are procured at a significant discount just to grant you that additional functionality. Now, this should have held a screen, so unfortunately, this being live, I don't have it right now. We will add it, of course, to the presentation that we will share online. But basically, this should read a table from the Dynamics 365 licensing guide, where it shows you which applications you can stack on top of base licenses. So you would see on the in the first column, you would see all the Dynamics 365 applications. On the horizontal axis, you would see these same applications, and you would see it filled out where you could stack one on top of the other. So for instance, if you have a base need for ERP and you want to use the finance application for 50 users within your organization, but these users also should have access to the sales enterprise application, you can buy 50 base licenses for Dynamics 365 for finance and add 50 attached licenses for Dynamics 365 for enterprise, sales enterprise. That's how you should read this table. Do check out the Dynamics 365 licensing guide if you can find it. It's an easy Google. It holds these tables and much more. And there's some caveats to this. So you cannot have a pro and an enterprise license in the same environment, and it needs to be spread over tenants or different sandboxes. This means that if you have a need for Sales Pro for certain users in your organization and Sales Enterprise for other users in your organization, then you should set up two different environments. Attached licenses can only be assigned to users with a correct base license. That's how you should read that table. That should be here. And in EA, if incorrectly purchasing attached licenses, you can step up the license to a base license. So if you buy the wrong SKU, you buy finance attached license, but it should have been the base license, the base for you. You can use a step up to make it a full base license. In CSP and MPSA, the attached licenses would need to be swapped out for the correct base license. And finally, you have what they call dual use rights or CAL equivalency. So if you buy any of these services, but you also still have an on-premise Dynamics environment, you can access that one with your base license or attached, depending on what you start with. Now, what's very important to optimize is how to read your storage needs. So in the past, you would have an environment, and if you needed additional storage, you could just buy 1 gigabyte of additional dynamic storage. But in this model, it works a bit differently, where they work with default capacity based on the application that you're buying, and you will be potentially granted additional storage based on the amount of licenses that you purchase. So for instance, if we look here towards sales enterprise, customer service enterprise, and field service, you would get a 10 gigabyte of Dataverse database storage. And for every base license that you buy, you would get an additional 250 megabytes. Similar with Dataverse file storage, 220 gigabyte minimum and 2 gigabyte per base license that you buy. And log storage, you would get 2 gigabytes as a base for these licenses. So you can see here what the starting point is for any of the applications that you're buying, and then you would see all the different options. You have the option to buy capacity add-ons. So if this doesn't serve your need, you can buy additional storage licenses. So again, for sales enterprise, customer service enterprise, field service enterprise, it would be 1 gigabyte that you can expand upon by buying a SKU of any of these three. So the base licenses give you the incremental storage. The attached licenses don't give you additional increase in your storage. So it's just based solely on the base license. Then you have what they call your different environments that you might need within your Dynamics tenant. And in order to add these environments, you would always need a minimum of 1 gigabyte of space, and you can start your new environment. You will share the storage across all your environments, so you do need to make sure that eventually you would have enough storage that you could run all your different environments. And why is this important? You need to calculate this upfront. You need to know what you might need from storage perspective, because the dataverse database storage is very, very expensive. This is not cheap storage. It's like 30 plus euros per gigabyte per month if you need to buy this additionally. So you do really want to know what to look out for in this sense. How can you optimize for this? Is check if you actually need all that database storage. The file storage is much cheaper, for instance. So can you work with file storage instead of the database storage? And how would you go about changing your environment to move to more to the file storage? So for heavy environments that use a lot of dynamic storage, you would potentially look at a lot of additional cost if you don't optimize your storage requirements. Then some additionals that might lead to you needing to buy more licenses than you need. There's minimum quantity requirements that you have for your tenant. So Microsoft doesn't just let you buy one license sometimes of a Dynamics application and just start using it as you please, but you would need to look for these minimum requirements. So if you look, for instance, at the Dynamics 365 ERP platform, commerce, finance, supply chain management, project operations, you would need a minimum of 20 licenses per tenant, but you could mix and match. So if you need finance and commerce, you can get 10 of each. For customer insight attached, there's a 20 license minimum in your tenant that you need to start with. In CSP, it's much more difficult. So in EA, you can mix and match, but in CSP, you would just need to buy the minimum amount of the application that you need. This is all listed in product terms. So if you want to read this back, you can go to the product terms page and go to the Dynamics 365 page, and it states the minimum requirements for the different products there. Then some additional items. You don't need licenses in your Dynamics environment for external users. So do benefit from this if you have a lot of B2B or B2C within your environment. Multiplexing is always something you want to take good care of. If you get audited, you might be in for a nice little surprise if you have pooled your connections. Anyone has access to this environment, either directly or indirectly, would need a license. Microsoft doesn't know concurrent use, so it's always a named user, and it doesn't matter how they access the environment. Again, dual use rights apply. Buying a single application would also give you team member functionality, so those users can go to different applications. So you buy a sales enterprise license, and that user also needs to sometimes do some light tasks in the customer service in that are assigned to customer service tasks. For instance, it might be that you already have these rights included. And again, finally, but just to stress it again, look at your storage requirements. And the old to the new model, I don't want to dwell on this too much because I think most of the customers of Microsoft have already moved to this. But how would you go about investigating going from the old model, which was licensed in a suite-based motion, usually for many customers, to this base and attached license motion? So first, you identify which apps you are using: sales, marketing, customer service, finance, commerce, project operations. Then how many users are using which apps? Are they just using one app? Are there multiple users using multiple apps? What's the best way to license this then? Do I just buy the base license and do attach licenses? What would be my optimal base license, etc., etc.? Then you need to check if you're using Power Platform with your customer engagement plan, because in the customer engagement plan, you would get a full access Power Apps and Power Automate license. But they changed it that you can only use Power Apps and Power Automate in conjunction to your Dynamics 365 environment. So you need to check if you created any Power Apps or if you have any flows running that are using services outside of the Dynamics 365 environment. If that's the case, you might need to buy additional licenses for these as well. Then check your storage requirements. So how much storage are you using in your current environment? How does it split in database, log, or file storage in the new setup? And what amount of storage will you get in your new configuration? And is it sufficient to cover your current needs? So if you know all this, then you're pretty much set to move to the new model. Now, finally, contracting Dynamics 365 is very interesting. Microsoft is very keen on getting this business in and getting you signed up to Dynamics 365. It's a very high scorecard item for many high-placed and ranked managers within Microsoft. So they do want to have this set up correctly. Long-term contracts are very much possible, 5 years, even 5 years plus. They don't even blink an eye. So they understand these are top tier business critical applications. And as such, you might sign up for a longer period of time. Always do your due diligence between enterprise agreement and the cloud solution provider program, especially if you're a smaller customer that's a level A, maybe B customer for Microsoft. It might be that your CSP partner can offer this at a lot cheaper rate, but then always challenge them on their margins. So you can sign this outside of your enterprise agreement, so you can sign a server and cloud enrollment for Dynamics only. That way, Microsoft can also make this attractive in the term that they set, and you have always the potential for further price protection. So Microsoft is not scared to offer something that they call not to exceed price. So in the event that your contract expires, you have the not to exceed price of X% of uplift for your new contract, which might benefit you heavily. You don't have to take that deal at that point in time. You can always renegotiate if you think that you can even get a better price, but this might help you secure some longer term risks on price increases. Always check out for subscription reduction options, and if that is possible for you, because Microsoft, especially in larger Dynamics 365 deals, often want customers to commit to a certain amount of quantities. And you should always check to see if you have any potential to scale down, because obviously this being a cloud product, you don't want to get stuck with thousands of licenses if you know that in the future you might go down significantly. Then single application plus potential additional applications per user or per tenant. So always check if you leverage the attach motion optimally. We see a lot of customers that just buy additional base licenses where they can even use an attach. So make optimal use of your attach licenses here. That was it for Dynamics 365. I hope that was very useful for you. If not, and you want to learn more, or you think that we've gone over something too quickly or haven't touched at all, do reach out, let us know. We might go too quickly sometimes. We apologize for that then. But we also want to take some good amount of time for Microsoft 365, because this is where a lot of optimization potential is, and where we find on average a 10 to 20% optimization. So what are we going to look at? With Microsoft 365, we basically see two key major improvement areas. And cleanup, so clutter in your environment, that shows that there's a lot of users that might not even benefit from the services anymore. and your optimal license position or optimization potential in your license configuration. So are you buying the right products for your actual requirements? So in order to be able to identify the first aspect, you would need administrator access to the M365 environment to download the necessary reports. And for item 2, you would need to further understand Microsoft licensing and pricing. That's where we often can help. We can do some quite easy workshops to identify what are you using now, what are you buying now, and how does this align. In the next couple of slides, we will demonstrate options for both these areas and what you should look into. So if we look at item number 1, so optimization potential by identifying clutter in your Microsoft 365 environment, we often look for these 4 key areas. Inactive users, people showing no activity at all in the M365 data. Inactivity on M365 apps for enterprise, its potential for moving to a better license type. Users assigned licenses without the need for it. Blocked users, for instance, potential right size to different license type. And finally, but the easiest one, underutilization of the product list. And I want to go through every aspect that you see here in the upcoming slides. We're always willing and able to see if we can work this out with you and for you as well. So if you are interested, we can always have a 1-hour session, see what you're doing right now, how you are doing it, and if there is, in our belief, optimization potential. So if we start with the easiest, it's very simple. We take the license quantities that you have. We see the optimization potential that you might have by checking the licenses bought versus assigned licenses. That delta is what you want to optimize for. Often, there might be a lot of deltas. And these deltas, you might have forgotten about them, but we won't. So we see a lot of customers that make a deal with Microsoft. They buy 1,000 Power Apps per user licenses as part of their enterprise agreement renewal discussions in order to drive the price down for other items like E3, E5, etc., etc. But you're not using the Power Apps licenses. So a year later, you get another invoice for these 1,000 licenses, but you're not using them. Do make this part of your best practice around license management, and reduce those licenses at the next anniversary. It might also be that your company is in heavy weather and you have let go a lot of users. It's no use to keeping those on the shelf when your contract anniversary comes up. Just reduce these licenses. In CSP, similarly, but then you even have the option to do this month over month. If you have the monthly cadence for your licenses, you can reduce these licenses month over month. Challenge your organization on this. Start early. If you are an EA, you want to start identifying what is possible for removal months in advance, because you need to report this 30 to 60 days in advance of your contract anniversary. Inactivity, and you see a little snapshot in the bottom of this slide. This is taken from the Office 365 active user details, and it shows you the licenses that are assigned on the right hand side, the assignment dates in the columns before that, and the last activity date, what's in the middle of the screen. It also shows you of the licenses that were assigned, what type of services have been turned on. So has Exchange been turned on? That's true. OneDrive, also true. Skype for business, not false. Yammer, also not been turned on, so also false. And has Teams, also true. So with this, you already get a lot of information. But what we are interested in the most is the active use. So if you see a blank in the activity date, it means that a user has never used this service. And it could be for plethora of different reasons. It might be that this user is not um, part of the organization yet, and this license has just been assigned, and the person still needs to start work. Or it might be that it's just been forgotten and never activated, and that user has been created but never started using it. Or a final example might be that this user has gotten all these licenses but isn't using the cloud services, but is using their on-premise counterparts and is only licensing these services to be able to access the on-premise environments, and not using cloud services. So there might be many different reasons, but what we usually check for is if users have been inactive for more than 30, 60, or 90 days, or have not been active at all, and then discuss with the client why these haven't been active. Might be that if they have shown activity but not for the last 90 days or more, that these are on long-term leave, like a sabbatical, or at home with a burnout. But you might want to envision how you handle these type of people. So if you have long-term leave in your organization, you might just want to make sure that you take away many of the licenses that they're of the services that they're not using, and only assign to them the services that they might need. Like if you have someone that's gone for a year, but might come back, okay, remove all the licenses, just give them an Exchange Online license or a OneDrive license to maintain their data, and then when they come back, you can give them back the services that they might need. In the interim, that license that you've taken away from them, so the suite license, you can assign that to another user. So use this data. Similar you can do for M365 apps for enterprise. And we see that here on this slide. It's been cropped a little, but here you see all the different users, anonymous in this example, obviously for reasons. Um, and you can see what applications have been assigned to this user. So a user might have M365 apps for enterprise, Project Online desktop client, or Visio desktop application, but it might not be using it. So if you look at the Project Online desktop client that you see here on the screen, it has not been activated, and there are no installations because it all reads 00000. So the person that has been assigned this Project Online desktop client might not need the Project Online license. It might be that it's using it to install an old school project client, but generally we see a lot of clutter in M365 environments where you can just reduce these licenses. So anything that has been assigned to a user and has not been installed, it might be potential for improvement. And additionally, anyone that has an installation but has not used that installation for more than, for instance, 90 days, you might want to have a discussion as well as to why these aren't using these services. So download the Office 365 activation user details, and you will find that you can easily check your options here. So two filters you want to apply here. Like I said, you want to check for everybody that has a 0 or only zeros because they're not using any installations for these desktop applications. And secondly, if they have installations but they have not used this in a longer period of time, that might be room for improvement as well. Next, blocked users is something that we typically find. So if you download the users report of all the users in your environment and filter the users that hold specific licenses, paid licenses, and then filter on block credentials true, you might see that you have a lot of users in your environment that are blocked. Blocked means they don't have access to your online environment anymore. And if they're blocked, then why do they still hold licenses? Isn't it easier to remove all those licenses and give them something else or nothing at all? Usually, what we see is that companies that are quite mature in their cloud use, they have a need to continue to license these users because Microsoft has a data retention policy of 30 days, and that often doesn't align with the company's need of their retention requirements. It might be that they need to retain the data for 90 days or for even longer. So that way, you might see a lot of licenses that you still have assigned, but it might not make sense to keep a full suite license. Usually, you want to keep Exchange Online data, maybe OneDrive data, for those regulatory requirements, but it doesn't require you to license those users that don't have any access to your environment with a Microsoft 365 suite license. So you can remove the E3 license, assign, for instance, an Exchange Online Plan 2 license, like you see happens here a lot in this overview, and then use the E3 license for somebody else that might join the organization. So if you have, for instance, these users in the top where they still have E3, Logbox, Azure Active Directory, Azure Information Protection Premium, those are all licenses that that user is no longer using because it doesn't have access to your environment anymore. So if you keep these licenses assigned solely because you have data retention policies that don't align with Microsoft, you might just want to revisit this in its entirety. If you're E5 user, this might not even be needed at all, and you can remove all licenses because within E5 you have a compliance feature called retention policies, and retention policies can help you set up just that. So if you need to retain the data for a very long period of time, you can do that even for the users that are leaving your organization. Now, going into the second aspect, where we want to look at the Microsoft 365 landscape and how to best go about licensing your users. It might be that Microsoft convinces you to just buy M365 E3 or M365 E5. And I see I even made it M360, Microsoft 364 on this slide. Apologies. But there's so many services included in the Microsoft 365 landscape, and you see E3 here on the page, and on the next slide here, I put all the E5 additions on the screen. So these services are, it's just an immense list of services. But what I want you to take away here is that it might be that you want to license your services according to what you actually require. So don't stare blindly at, oh, I need this or I need that functionality from Microsoft. You need to turn it around. You need to know what your requirements are, and then you want to map it to these services. So this is always a general great overview to see what you might or might not want. And we use it quite a lot. So we discuss based on such an overview with our clients and just highlight the items that are of key importance to the customer, and then we check, is it must have, nice to have, great to have, should have, and when do you want to have this, when is it going to go live, and is there a rollout schedule for this? And if you know that, then you can easily work towards profiling the users that might need certain functionality and how to best go about licensing this. And you will find that there's many different options to license your users, and a one size fits all definitely isn't the way to go in the Microsoft cloud for Microsoft 365. Because obviously you also have these things called Microsoft 365 first line or front line, F3 and F1, and these hold similar functionality, but then for users that might not have a one-to-one relation with a workstation or have multiple devices that they do their work on, but just work in maintenance, the barista serving you your coffee every morning, your secretaries, the people, the hostess at your different locations, security personnel, you name it. They might not need the full E3, E5 license, but they might be better suited with an F3 license, for instance. So I updated these slides that I presented somewhere last year based on the March 2022 price increase to show your options and how you should actually, according to us, go about identifying your needs and requirements. So if you're an E3 customer and you require some additional functionality in the sense of E5 compliance and E5 security, you don't need to move to Microsoft 365 E5. It's cheaper to just buy the separate suites. Not a lot cheaper, as you can see. It's 47.57 for that configuration that you see here in the second column, and 49.14 on the right hand side. And so for just a little over €1.5 per user per month, you might get the phone system and the Power BI Pro license for everyone, but it might not make sense to have those. So why not just save those costs and not buy the full E5 suite? Additionally, obviously you shouldn't keep stacking all the licenses, because then you will definitely pay more. If you start stacking Power BI and the Teams voice items on top of that, you definitely will be out way worse than just buying the E5 suite. And it will cost you 23% more. But if you have a look at, for instance, just buying your requirements, it might be that you're way better off. So if you start with E3 and you identify that you have certain requirements for moving to the cloud, just buy those components. Not everybody needs Defender for Office 365 Plan 2, but it might be that Plan 1 suits you just fine, which is quite a cheap solution. And you might want to have some additional Active Directory Premium functionality and want to buy the P2 item. And it might even be on the third column that you want to start with audio conferencing to give your users the functionality they need for dialing in and out of video calls, video meetings, so to say. You would still be 26.5% cheaper or better off than buying the full E5 suite. So it really, really depends on the functionality that you need. So do always do your due diligence, check your requirements, and then start to see how you can best license this, and always break down the suite, because Microsoft will obviously try to persuade you to buy the full E5 suite, give you a nice discount. But what happens if you just buy the components that you need at list pricing? It might even be cheaper, and they might still give you a little bit of discount at the end of the day if you negotiate this correctly. If you want to know more about negotiating with Microsoft, we did a session a few weeks ago where we showed our current learnings from the past fiscal year. Definitely worth a look as well. And another item that I wanted to highlight is even if you buy E3, it might be that there's solutions where you're better off. Like, for instance, you break down into the components of E3, Windows E3 and Enterprise Mobility and Security E3, and then add a E1 license. And you might not have M365 apps for enterprise, but it might be that a lot of your users within your organization don't need a dedicated Office client, but can work from the browser. It will save you 34%. And if you need additional email functionality, like online archiving or something which is not in Exchange Online Plan 1, you can add that step up and still save 24% on top of your E3 license. This is again based on the post-March 2022 pricing, which is way cheaper. And even if you start stacking some additional E5 features on top of it, you still will be cheaper off than buying the M365 E3 license. If you have office requirements, you might even check if you can buy these on the second-hand market. If you're in Europe, for instance, who knows? It will still probably save you a lot of money. Then use this all to your benefit. So mix and match all these different items. Check what users need what functionality. So we have a quick checklist how to do this in practice. First, it starts with your requirements. You need to know what your requirements are. Don't just blindly check which suite aligns, but just write down all the different requirements that you have. Then check your internal requirements on how this can be licensed. What options are there? And do I just buy all the single components and price these out? Do I buy a suite because I have touched multiple items that are present in, for instance, E5 security, and that might be cheaper than buying those single components? And then when you price those out, you want to know when that suite is more interesting than the sum of its components. And circle back. So you have done all the requirements check. You have checked which part of your organization needs which functionality. Did we do it right? Are we missing anything? Do we not need to license Exchange Online plan to step up for these users, or should we? And what's going to be the benefit? So we put some final examples here. I will leave those for now for you to check yourself, because I see that we're quite quickly running out of time, and I want to move towards the final conclusions of this presentation, where I want to look at what you should take away from this. So if you are using Microsoft Cloud, you should optimize your environment. And this will be and is your main driver for cost reduction. And what I mean by that is, it might be that you have a very, very nice contract set up with a lot of discount from Microsoft, but it won't stay that way. In 3 years' time, your discount will be significantly decreased. And what you will end up with is a very highly priced cloud service from Microsoft. How can you save cost? Is by optimizing that environment and using these pieces of theory that I showed you here in practice. We do this on a day-to-day, and it definitely benefits a lot of the organizations that we help, especially in their negotiation as well. Be aware of the license that you have. Know what you have got and how you can leverage this. Understand where you need to look for optimization potential, and if you can reduce licenses and or change your license configuration. This is not a one-time effort. This is something that you want to do continuously, if not monthly, quarterly, then definitely on an annual basis. Go through this. You used to be able or need to count your entire true up if you had an enterprise agreement for your on-premise environment. It's no different now in the cloud. You can save even more than you could back in those days. Check where and how you contract. Check if Microsoft allows you to scale up and down at no additional cost. Don't lock yourself into cloud subscriptions, as it will cost you dearly. We see a lot of customers that have signed deals with Microsoft where they had to buy, for instance, hundreds or thousands of Dynamics 365 licenses without even a use case for this. But Microsoft said you cannot reduce this, and you need to be continue to license this throughout the entire term of your contract. Don't fall into these traps and just say no. It's not worth the additional discount that you might get. And finally, for Azure, make sure to use the cloud cost management tools that are available to you, but don't just focus on that. Make your own practice. So do look again at all the items that we've covered here. Do I make these checks? Do I do this on a regular basis? For Azure, you can do this month over month, because you will be invoiced on a retroactive basis. So Azure, you should continuously monitor through Azure Cloud Cost Management. That was it for today. I want to thank you very much for your time and being with us here. If there's any questions, I'll be sure to drop in the comments and start answering those. I see we've gone a little bit over time, so I want to leave it at this for now. And I do hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.